So I'm Andrea. I work at 121. 121 is a network of players in renewable energy, a global network including governments, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, academia, and industry players. And at 121, I am coordinating the work on sustainability of renewables, of which energy justice is an important part.
So I'm Larissa. I work at the Research Center for Climate Law based at the University of Graz. And I am a research manager and project manager with the Research Center, and I look into topics related to just transitions, global North-South partnerships, sustainable development, as well as the use of public participation as deliberative democracy to ensure just transitions.
Hi, I'm Maria Fluda. I'm representing Lean Inequity and Sustainability. We are a women empowerment organization, 100% volunteer run, and our aim is to empower women in the energy sector, traditional and renewable, and to create a safe space, provide visibility and opportunities to women. So, yes.
Very good. Yeah. Holger is my name. I'm also at the University of Graz at the Field of Excellence Climate Change, where I'm working on transdisciplinary issues of various types. And this time I'm working with the department that Larissa is from on just energy transitions.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Alexander Haag. I'm working at the GIZ, German Development Corporation agency, so to say, mainly in the area of energy and heading a program that's called Energizing Development. So we work a lot basically on energy access issues in developing countries with small-scale renewables, so to say. Yeah, happy to be here today. So I'm going to hand over to the audience.
It's really mean, because I just wanted to observe. My name is Samat Kazan. I'm a journalist. I'm a magazine journalist, usually writing about Austrian politics, right-wing politics, and I'm basically just a visitor in this conference and trying to find innovative projects that I can cover. So the more examples you can give where they're which are working underground, the better.
Hi everybody, my name is Victoria. I'm from Ukraine. Now I'm living in Milan in Italy. I'm a scientist, I'm a lawyer. My previous studies and scientific field in Ukraine was about administrative and informational law, and financial law, and participation and principle of transparency, engagement in society. And now my academic research is about just transition, and also I'm working in NGO. Easy Sustainability, it's Italian one. So we create networks, we provide information about sustainability issues. This is what we are doing.
Hi, my name is Lou. I'm a student at the VU University. I'm doing a master in socio-ecological economics and policies. I've also been a civil society observer for the UNFCCC for the last few years, and I've been engaged in different European NGOs like Youth Environment Europe, and making sure, and working on democratization and a fairer access for the youth to environmental and social projects.
Hello everyone, my name is Laila. I'm working at GIZ in the Energizing Development Project as an intern, so I will be supporting in the gender and communication task. I'm also a master's student. I'm studying sustainable development management. And right now I'm in Germany, but originally I'm from Bangladesh. The reason for saying all this, because being like a Bangladeshi where the renewable energy is now the new concept or the new focus, and also supporting on the gender aspects on an energy project. So this session is really interesting for me. So looking forward to it.
We're very fortunate to have one of the hosts of the whole conference here now, Iasa.
Hi, I'm sorry that I'm late. I didn't find the forum. I'm Caroline Sim from YASA. I work in a project on just transitions for all within net zero carbon emissions. And yeah, I had exchanges with the organizers, and I'm very happy to be here.
We just deviated slightly from our plan because of the small number of participants. So we have more of a participatory event now.
Yes, hi. I'm part of the organizing team. I'm Mariela, working at REN 21, leading on community development and communications. And I always think that it's better to have 5 engaged participants that have 20 looking at their phones. So very happy to make this friendly and cozy. And I'm sure we'll all learn a lot from each other.
As a moderator, I would take the liberty to share a quick impression from the overall event, and then let's see how that resonates, or if you would like to address other issues. When visiting, participating in different events here yesterday and today, I notice a slight bias towards technological solutions, maybe also financial solutions, but that's usually where the story ends when talking about energy transitions. Justice, that we only touched upon, Andrea only touched upon briefly on one slide, has many different aspects. And we do believe that these just energy transition partnerships can be one means, one tool to help to engage a broader audience and also to bring together bottom-up and top-down approaches in making that transition happening. So these partnerships can take very different forms. They can be within countries. Larissa will be able to talk to, for example, a national just transition partnership in South Africa, how that works and how far it got and what can be learned from it maybe. But they can also be international. That's one of the aspects we also want to address here in terms of partnerships between the global north and the global south. I don't know what you heard, but sessions that I attended were mostly focusing on the question, how much energy can the north get from the south? Plus a little more than that, but that was the strong question. It was less, the discussions I attended were less about the energy security in the countries of the south, while obviously just energy transition partnerships is looking for win-win situations where all partners gain in some sense. And that's something that, to some extent, development cooperation can address. But to be provocative, maybe there are others who can do it equally or even better. But obviously, every individual institution has their own stakes. And the question is, how can we bring together these different perspectives, including the private sector, which has its stakes, the development cooperation, the public sector, civil society, citizens, science also, I should say, coming from a university. But maybe you can provide a brief perspective from development cooperation, how you think this can play out, and maybe also how you deal with these strong interests that are on the table in terms of huge investments taking place in the global south and expectations coming with it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I mean, it is, of course, a very, very challenging undertaking. I mean, South Africa, I mean, we try to have a just energy transition partnership with India, for example. And so in these countries, you have very, very well organized, of course, power structures, as you also had in Germany, you know, before the coal phase out, just that Germany had the liberty to kill the problem with money, right? So we just basically bought out, so to say, the opposition to it, which actually was quite well organized, so to say. It's not that we had a lot of coal miners left, but they were just very vocal, and I think that's also something to take into account downstream for the discussions also in other countries. And then I think from a German perspective, the idea really was to use some of that experience that we gained in Germany and to really transfer that to other countries. I mean, we also started that in Ukraine, for example, at a transition project also to support Ukraine, basically getting away from the coal. Then came the war. Doesn't make things easier, of course, but it's just to say it's not only north-south, so to say. I think it's really a global approach where the idea of the German government, the development cooperation, is to share these experiences. And then the question is, okay, so what can we do as GIZ also? I mean, we cannot come up with the finance, obviously, because that's on a level where normally, you know, the large banks and so forth can come in. But what we can do, we think, is stakeholder consultation. So that is really trying to look at the just energy transition, basically focusing on kind of the blind spot that until now, I think, really has been left aside a little bit. I think that's being recognized also on the higher political levels, because, I mean, it becomes more and more evident that if you want to go for a transformation, there are winners and losers. And the more you communicate about the approach, about the need for it, and the more basically you are able to gather different parts of society behind it, the longer lasting the impact of that change actually will be for you. And it also reduces the risk that a new government will basically reverse course, considerably and move back to coal or whatever it is. But that is, of course, a long-term project. It's not something that you can do. That's also our challenge in a project implementation period time of 2 or 3 years. Yeah, you really need to have a long breath, so to say, to push that through. And of course, you need to look at the losers. And yes, there are the coal miners who are the losers in countries that are heavily reliant on coal and who are also basically producing coal. But then if we think, and we try to really think energy transition in a broader sense, and that's what I've been also experiencing here the past 2 days, is of course, if you look at the people that still don't have access to energy, there's a second layer of complexity, so to say, because we are trying to give them access to modern energy, to electricity, and until now they use different forms like wood actually, or charcoal. But if we push the charcoal producers out of the market, we also create losers again. Yeah. So just to say, there are different levels. I think people who will benefit from a paradigm shift, from a system transformation, for sure. But there will always be societal groups or individuals that will lose out, and it's about being conscious, being aware, and then trying to think about options on how to get these losers, so to say, also included in the positive benefits of that transition. Honestly, it will not happen always. I mean, you cannot, let's say, upskill every coal miner to become an entrepreneur in the solar pay-go market or something like that. But if you already, let's say, are able to capture a fraction, I think then that's already quite an achievement. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
I would encourage you to come in any time. If you have any questions or comments.
Also, when you talk about an ideological question, like when you're a coal miner, you might have this working class identity, and then say change that into as you said, like a renewable energy entrepreneur. Is this an issue?
Totally. I mean, and you imagine you live close to that coal mine where you've been working for, I don't know, 30 years, right? You have your family, you have your kids, and suddenly there's a politician coming telling you, why don't you install solar rooftop, on XYZ rooftops. Well, there's only so much rooftops in your neighborhood, right? So you need to be very mobile. You need to move probably into a different city. It's a totally different setup. So it's not that easy. It's really, it's shaking at the core of the life, so to say, of these people who have been working there for years, for decades sometimes. Yeah? So it's and then it's focused on one region. So that means that region, everything in that region, from school to hospitals, the whole economy is dependent on that sole, let's say, production in this case of let's say coal in the coal mine, right? So if you kill the coal mine, you would basically kill the entire community. I mean, everything that was there until now that was able to produce income for these people will be gone, and that is what is, of course, creating a lot of fear. And if people are afraid, then it's really hard to talk with them on a non-emotional basis, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and that's really a tricky thing to communicate that in the right way and to do the change process, but not to overdo it, so to say, time-wise. It takes really time. But it's a very delicate matter for sure, yeah. And it's probably also not something where we always have the best solutions at hand for sure, yeah. But I think a lot of the time it's really about getting the people into one place and talk to them before you also make the decisions, yeah. It's really about inclusion to get those consensus, so to say, across the board, how to move forward. But it takes time, and that's not always what politicians want, who are elected for 4 years or something, right? So they, of course, want to push through a political agenda, a reform agenda, or whatever. So then these two trains, so to say, are colliding sometimes. Yeah.
Before turning to the left, I wanted to have one quick follow-up question in terms of time it takes and also platforms to bring all the different stakeholders to the table. Have you seen any examples where one can learn from, where such a platform or network starts emerging, which could be a basis for such longer-term multi-stakeholder dialogues, or is that wishful dreaming?
So I don't, let's say, have an online platform that I would recommend right now, yeah? But let's say there are concepts and methodologies on how to do that, let's say the stakeholder mapping, and then involve people gradually, so to say, over time. I think that is would, in my opinion, not be the main challenge. I think it's really challenging to get the local government on board and behind it, so on national level, but more particular also in the regions where the change has to happen. These people are, of course, rooted in the society in these places, and they are the one, they are taking the brunt, so to say. They're taking the brute force of the reaction of the people on the ground, and if they don't stand behind that change, then I think you have a problem. Yeah? So they would need to be included for sure. Yeah.
I look to you again. If you want to intervene, please do any time.
Thank you. And to do the transition from the fossil fuels, because it's much cheaper, and this we already have this access, and we can provide for vulnerable societies and group of people access to this type of energy which they need right now. But together with this, we would like and we need to do the transition to renewable energy sources, and this is not cheap at all, and this will take the time again. So where's the answer? So should it be border under the government financiation support, or how? Because also the investors are scared to do this, and from the legal point of view, I understand why, because the government used to change the legislation, they lose money, they lose the projects. So this is...
Yeah. Who wants to go on either the participation, how to achieve that, the funding, how to achieve that, or with whom to work? I mean, all three of you can go for it.
Yeah, I'll go first. So, so I'll totally agree with Alex and what he says about people not being happy with the transition. I think, in my view, it's about a proper phase out of fossil fuels and bringing in the renewable energy. So we cannot just close the taps overnight, because that's not going to work, specifically with the population rising, and we need probably double the energy that we use now in the next 30 to 40 years. So we need to kind of understand that it has to be an energy mix and of the countries that they want to phase out. And there's many successful examples, specifically from the European countries and cities. Yesterday I was in the Vienna phase-out presentation, phase-out gas, actually, and they have a very thorough plan of how that's going to be done, how to engage the stakeholders, how to engage the community, and all the different ways that that is going to happen, and it is happening. So there is there's robust examples there of that this has been happening, so it can be done. In terms of reskilling people for green skills, as we saw earlier, now the latest numbers is that we will have 42 million jobs created in the renewable energy sector by 2050. So that is a great opportunity and a challenge, because there is not skilled force. So we have to think about how to reskill people and do it fast, and how to encourage people going to renewable energy jobs, technical and non-technical. So that's a great opportunity. I will bring also the gender lens, since I'm here for my women empowerment organization. So we have this great opportunity to include women in all this transition. And just transition, for me, it has a different meaning on the different lenses that you see it. For example, just means inclusive as well. So that means including everybody and including women, which are now in less than 30%, even in the renewable sector. I mean, solar is much better, it's almost 50%, but then you have wind 40%, and then you have even less. And the traditional energy sector, it's 22%, the women workforce. So we have a big opportunity there to get everybody and make it just inclusive transition as well. On the African energy, so I mean, obviously you've heard it, there is no transition for them because there's nothing to transition from, so they don't have energy. So I think the renewable is a great opportunity to bring energy to all these 680 million people that are without energy. So I think there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer when we mean just transition. So each country and each even city and each culture and each continent, they have their own kind of transition that they have to follow. There's different things, but definitely coming all together and engaging the stakeholders, global north and south, that's the success recipe in my view.
So if it's not a transition, what is it? Is it development? Is it leapfrogging? What is it?
In the countries that they don't have anything to transition, I mean, they transition from wood and charcoal to energy. So yeah, you can still call it transition, but it's not when we mean, and it's what we mean out of fossil fuels. So for them, really, they hear that, and that's, the countries that are big emitters and they're not emitting.
I think as a starting point, we need to understand that energy access is understood differently in the global north and the global south. Touching exactly on what Maria has said, when we talk about energy access in the global north, we're not talking about the ability to switch on the light. We're talking about the ability of what type of energy are we accessing in our households. That shift transition that we're talking about is really the transition from fossil fuel-based energy sources to renewable energy sources. Whereas in the global south, when we talk energy access, we really do mean, can we switch the light on? How consistent, how secure, how affordable is it to switch the light on? That being said, I think in the global south, where we do have majority centralized electricity markets, it's a lot easier to place that responsibility on the government to say that you need to change your energy sources to renewable energy. As a prime example, we have, I can only speak specifically to South Africa, but South Africa has now taken the move to adopt a just transition, and on the 23rd of October just received a $1 billion loan from the World Bank to support this just transition. So that was the first step. But this goes back previously to COP26, when South Africa had a just transition agreement with the EU and some EU member states. That was a political declaration, and it remains a political declaration. So, it's great to have the words, but when there is no action, when there's no forward steps, then that becomes a problem. If we look at on-the-ground experiences, I think Austria has some amazing examples to provide.
Larissa, before you go to Austria, I'm curious, when 1 billion is coming into South Africa, is that fostering justice?
It depends on how you utilize the funds that you receive. So, for example, I think procedural justice, distributive justice, restorative justice have to be the three pillars of any just transition. We can't have the word justice, just transition, if we're not aware of who's impacted, how they're impacted, and how can they ensure that whatever impacts happen to them, that they have a say in it. So, being part of, or being South African and being outside of the country, I have a lot of access to resources to see what's happening on the international realm, and as a researcher, that's my job. I have to know what's happening. But I think about majority of the population in South Africa that have no idea about an energy transition whatsoever. They have no idea that there is a need for renewables. Their basic need in life is to ensure that there's food on the table, that their households are educated, that they can go to school, that they can receive healthcare. And we, being researchers on our side, we can understand that energy is also a starting point to make sure that all of these things happen. We know that without energy, we can't have, true healthcare. You can't have development. You can't have education without access to energy. But you have to understand that the lived experiences of so many people are left out of the just transition discussion because they are forgotten. And a lot of the time, governments feel that because they are implementing this just transition that will ultimately help people who are needing energy access, that this is something that should be a top-down approach. That's not the case. Majority of the people that require energy access live in rural areas that are so far away from the national grid, and especially if you're talking about a centralized energy system, that national grid exists in urban areas. So regardless of whether you want to transition the urban areas, you have to consider that you might have to extend the national grid, which takes a lot of money, or you need to develop other solutions, mini-grids, standalone home systems. That takes money too. If we talk about the realities of mini-grid infrastructure, a lot of communities, rural communities, vulnerable communities would be willing to know that they can have consistent, affordable access to energy. However, mini-grids, if not implemented through a financed project or through government initiatives of any sort, if that community comes together and decides on their own that they wish to establish a mini-grid, the tariffs are excessive. They don't have the financing or the resources to do that. And for them to be able to enter into a financing project, do they know where to go? Do they know who to call? Do they know what channels they can access the funding to build their mini-grid? So as a starting point, I think awareness and education is amazing. It's great. But also awareness and education in the realities of the people that live this day-to-day life without energy access. I mean, being a South African, we have some sort of a taste of what that's like. We have load shedding, which is where the government cuts off power for about up to 12 hours a day, 2 to 12 hours, depending on the demand for the electricity grid. So all South Africans, no matter who you speak to, really do understand what it's like not to have energy access. But still, we don't exactly understand what it's like to never have had energy access. And that's something that you have to understand within the grand scheme of the just transition.
We wanted to go to Austria, but maybe looking first if there are any questions or issues. Go ahead.
It
try.
doesn't match really, but because you said South Africa, like how much did your experience in the whole democratization process help into the energy question right now? The reconciliation councils are all this, because like I know like in the policy level, South Africa is like for many of like democracy movements who are in authoritarian regimes, it's like this stays where they're kind of aim to.
I mean, I think as a South African, maybe I can be a little bit controversial here. But I think I really do commend South Africa for its attempt at democracy. And I do say attempt, because me personally, as an academic, I believe that democracy is not really achievable, true democracy at least. Because if we're going to say that every person has a voice in a democratic republic, we need to really mean it. And if half of the population don't know who they're voting for and what they're voting for, can we really say that they voted for a democracy? A lot of the people, if you go to a township, for example, and you ask them which political party they vote for, they would say the ANC. And if you ask them why, they would say because the ANC brought us out of apartheid. Not because these are the programs that are provided by the ANC, not because, you know, this is the policy incentives, this is the funding that I could get, this is, you know, how they benefit me in the long run. And I think that sometimes takes away the real voting opportunity of the people within the republic. If you take that over to any other, you know, democratic state, I think that's the exact same problem. I don't think South Africa is alone in that. I think if you bring that to Europe as well, if you ask some people who are farmers, who are involved in heavy industry, who aren't involved in the academic debate, so to say, I say that in quotation marks, but who don't research these things or don't have the opportunities to know what's happening. If you ask them why they were voting for a political party, I don't think they're going to bring out the numbers and statistics. And with that, I think you take away democracy. I think when you window dress democracy and it looks great and it sounds great and it comes with some really nice legislation, that's fantastic. But if the legislation is not working for the people in which it operates over, then is it really democratic? That's it.
Difficult to take the floor after such statements. But I just wanted to rebound in different things that have been said before, and it was about the examples, but they're very different things. So first of all, about the lengthy process of involving, for instance, coal miners in transitions and etc. Well, at REN21, we really advocate for multi-stakeholder involvement, and we know how it could be. This process could be painful sometimes because you need to involve people that have opposed views, etc. I think there was an interesting example in Spain of just transition, where there was tripartite agreements with the governments and the workers' unions, and at the end it was enshrined in law, and they need to trickle down to regional agreements. And I think there was a nice example in one province where a coal mine was transformed into a wind farm. But just to provide some examples that maybe could be used. And then it comes also something that is important, which is the role of local authorities. And you seem to say that they were difficult to bring in, but however, local authorities are, be there cities or rural, because it could be beyond cities, being the closest to people, as could be unions, could be the how do you say it, translators and the mediators of this kind of processes. And I read that GIZ was involved in some local deployment of local consultations in Togo, could it be? And I was wondering if you had experience about that. And yes, that were my questions. And
before you respond, I wanted to ask you about the different means to achieve more energy security and the transition. The role of energy communities, is that something that you also emphasize?
yeah, sure. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think we can both. It's our common interest, domain of interest, and indeed, if community energy is also a powerful tool to involve people and to involve citizens. And indeed, in Europe is at the moment a good example of mixing bottom-up and top-down, because it has been a push. I mean, the community energy movement started long ago, and from citizens, I think. Pioneers were Denmark, Germany, probably the UK, and now it's really widespread across Europe. I'm myself a part of an energy cooperative in Paris, very wealthy energy cooperative, say. But and then at the end, now the European Union has enshrined this in the legislation. So every country needs to translate into law, into national legislations, the definition of energy communities, provide framework for their development, and also I think under the latest Repower EU, this is mandatory, or should be mandatory, advised that every city of over 10,000 inhabitants should have at least one energy community. So then in the developing world, access to capital to basically buy solar panels or wind turbines or methanizer facilities. I don't know, the word in English is more difficult. That's another story. But yet, I believe it's a powerful tool, but maybe Larissa also you can say something.
Yeah, so I think energy communities bring a lot of power into the community itself and encourage prosumership. I can give you the Austrian example because it's closer to home. In the Almenland region in Styria, or Steiermark, there is a model region. Almenland is the model region for an energy community. And this community was established as part of a project called CLU. And CLU is a Klimafond-funded project. So I found out about the Almenland energy community from going hiking in the region. And I had a discussion with some of the people that were involved in the energy community there. And it was really interesting to see how they became involved and what the process was for them to become involved. So it was a typical project format, if you would think of it as that. The CLU researchers from Austria, Germany, France, and another country escapes my mind now, but approached different regions that would be the optimal energy community format, and said to them that we can assist you with building an energy community, so installing the solar panels, we can give you the skills and knowledge and resource to maintain them and to continue with the maintenance, the reparations, and we'll put you in contact with the people that you need to establish this energy community. And this was also, limited time, 3 to 4 year project, so all of this had to happen within the space of the project. The people in Almenland are really grateful for this happening because now they are fully self-sufficient and they are able to take care of their energy consumption and production within the small town community that they have formed. But without that intervention from a research perspective and from these researchers coming together and saying we can start this project using the Klimafond funding, they would never have known that this is a possibility. And if we wait for every single researcher to come up with a project proposal and then apply to a fund to be, it takes a long process, and you don't know if you'll be accepted or not, and only a certain amount of energy communities are, able to be formed throughout the years. So the next thing is, a lot of those communities are unaware that you can approach the Klimafond personally and establish a community without research organizations. And if you make people aware of things like that, if there is a campaign to go to these smaller communities and to have discussions with them and say, what are your energy needs? How do you feel about your energy consumption? Do you know that you can use smart meters? Do you know about standalone home systems? Do you know about these things? Do you know the benefits that they have long term? And also, if you're willing to discuss the economic benefits of having solar energy. The initial financial input is extensive. And if you can subsidize that with government funding, with project funding, then that makes it a little bit easier. And you have a return on investment at some point in the future. Having those kind of realistic discussions as well really do help. But putting together the different best practices within the EU, a lot of EU member states have a similar format for ensuring energy communities are formulated. So it's really a forward-thinking plan, but to start up the plan, it doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a lot of money to do that, and you can't solely rely on communities to come together, to find the funding where exactly.
So if you see Larissa hiking, you better be careful. She may draw you into her next project. If you have any questions, please, anytime.
Here. It's not really related to what you just said, but I feel like that's something that we should talk about that hasn't been talked about enough in this conference these past few days. I'm really glad that we're talking about workers' conditions when we talk about renewables, but I'm also thinking about the worker conditions related to lithium mines, for example, in solar panels. And I've been hearing a lot about renewables, and I've studied it, and I know the great potential of it. But I feel like we don't talk enough about, for example, the indigenous displacement that involves, and to have been also a lot of UN conferences, there are a lot of indigenous people that are very almost against renewables because it's directly affecting their community and they're being displaced. And even in Europe, we can talk about Norway. There are many examples. So that would be my first question, I guess, would be what is your approach towards that, and maybe your opinion. My second question is, in Europe there is a lot of not in my backyard policy when it comes to, for example, wind turbines. I can say, for example, my parents were trying to buy a new house in France, and there was a huge wind turbine project that was being constructed, and all of the people that were living around couldn't sell their houses because nobody wanted to live there because it was too close, and so they were not being compensated for the price of their houses that were devaluated because of that. So there's a lot of these tensions happening right now, and I wanted to see if we could talk about it.
Maybe before you go, can we ask Alexander about if he was to head the office in Bolivia, how would he deal with these concerns about deteriorating conditions socially or environmentally with these invasions of northern countries' energy needs and like lithium or other material needs?
Yeah, before coming to that, I was just, when you were posing the question, I was just thinking, it's interesting how much focus there is on these aspects of these, let's say, rare earth minerals and stuff that you definitely need for, yes, for renewables and for others. And then if you have a coal mine also in Germany and you dig out the coal, it frequently literally happens that you destroy entire settlements. Like the state is coming in and saying, we have to dig for coal here, it's a nice village, but we just take it away. And you, for your house, yes, you get a compensation, but you have to move. And it was a fait accompli, it was accepted. There was, a local little bit of it was changed a little bit, but it was happening, at least in Germany, I know, like for years and years and years. And it's still happening. It's a funny thing. We talk about our coal phase out, but we are still actually destroying the villages and houses because these big machines, they are hungry and we need to dig out the coal. So it just came to my mind. Not that it's a good answer. Now in Bolivia, I would say, of course, it's a problem. It has to be addressed. I know that there are other GIZ projects that I'm not so involved in particularly that question on how to ensure on a sustainable and inclusive manner, that actually these minerals can be mined, because also in the countries there are of course also divergent interests. So there will be the miners who are normally connected quite good to the political decision makers, yeah, who say there's a lot of money, we mine it, we sell it, we earn money, right? So a lot of the time I would say the political system will be in favor of mining, and then as you say, rightfully say, quite often it happens that there are indigenous people or minorities, so to say, that are actually suffering heavily, more or less, from these mining activities. And here I think it's of course very important that for the global north and also for the companies buying these materials, no, that we put pressure on them, that we enforce standards, that you only buy minerals from mines that are, well, let's say, well, there's a certificate that they are mining under, let's say, proper circumstances, and not are basically, well, let's say, taking away land from indigenous people or exploiting people. And that is, I mean, is something that is happening in this extractive industry sector. That's how we kind of call it currently all over the place, all over the world. It's also, of course, a big issue, like in Congo. Huh? I mean, cobalt and so forth, also for the mobile phones that we all possess and so forth. So it's, but I think it's a discussion that's happening, that's going on. It's not perfect, but I think it's moving in the right direction, so to say. But then I wanted to just quickly come back to your question that you were asking on the investments. I wanted to make a little bit of a provocative statement. I think that in the future, these transition processes that we see will probably not so much be politically, let's say, induced. It's not going to be that a government like, let's stick with South Africa, says, you know, we're going to go for the just transition now in terms of coal phase out or fossil fuel phase out, focusing on renewables. I think if you look at the latest IEA report, and you take kind of for granted what they say, that we have peak emissions before 2030, because renewables are so cheap and they still continue getting cheaper, that we will end up in a situation where we have a lot of these transformations in many countries kind of running into them without actually knowing, because investment decisions are, of course, most of the time being made on an economic basis. And in these systems, so to say, all the investments, we can see that already now, 80% of the investments, right, are flowing into renewables. It will lead to the fact that fossil fuels will be the most costly option of producing energy, I think, very soon, in the next 5 to 10 years in many, many countries. And then it will automatically lead to the fact that you just shut down the coal-fired power plant, for example, because it doesn't make economically any sense for your utility, and they also have to calculate. And that leads to a reduced demand, of course, in coal. So the coal mines also closed down. And I think this is something, again, it's a bit different from the politically kind of very clearly induced change. We want to do that. South Africa, a couple of other countries, to, let's say, a phenomenon where we will be running into it and we'll be awakening the next day and say, okay, how didn't we see this coming? That actually now they are closing down, phasing out, and we have no plan what to do with the people who suddenly are on the street. I'm exaggerating here a little bit, but I think this is actually coming, because I'm quite positive about the transformative impact that renewables are about to have actually.
Andrea, you wanted to come in.
Yes, well, part of the answer was done by Alex. I think, again, it should be put in perspective. When you talk about extractive industries and human rights abuses, including abuses on indigenous people's rights and land rights, the fossil fuels industry is no example. You have the coal mines. The current example is a pipeline that is going to cross Africa, right? And you need to put into perspective the quantities. We are mining 8 billion tons of coal, 4 billion tons of oil, and the equivalent of 2.5 something billion tons of gas. And when you compare to lithium, I mean, the quantity is really small. However, that doesn't allow the mining industry for lithium to conduct human rights abuses or environmental degradation. And here again, yes, it's the possible mitigation solutions. First of all, indigenous people's rights are stated by the UN Declaration of Indigenous People's Rights that requires free, prior, and informed consent before any activity or any displacement. So that's the role of governments and to enforce this regulation, the role of companies to follow it, but again, is how the world functions, and yes, it's the work of the renewable energy industry and governments to make this happen. And regulations that demand a mandatory due diligence on human rights and environment and etc. are all contributing to this trend. But then again, I lost a little bit the thread, but again, the multi-stakeholder approach and should be the best one, because renewables can be sited in different places. You don't need to have a wind farm decided when, I mean, you can have wind farms everywhere, more or less. So the multi-stakeholder approach may be longer, may be more difficult, but at the end what you will gain is support and really is building something that people will be aiming for. Well, it could sound as a wishful thinking, but we are here to try to understand how making this happen. And just to, again, I'm very aware and feel deep inside that mining is a detrimental environmental activity, and we should be aware of that. But when you think of, when you hear about the mining for the energy transition, you need to keep in mind what we are mining for. And we are mostly mining for batteries that are in our laptops and mobile phones and electric vehicles. So there's also a transformation that needs to happen about mobility, with not changing the full internal combustion cars to electric vehicles, but a shift of the mobility system, etc., etc. Renewables themselves do not require that much lithium.
And of course, we should also refer to circular economy, where sooner or later we don't need to have inputs, at least not at that amount, but are able to recover all or most of the used minerals or inputs. I don't know how you feel. I was just made aware that we have spent an hour. We would have more time. We have this room for another half hour. So I look once more if you have a question that you would like to pose, because you get answers. So.
Before we continue, I just wanted to bring it back to the indigenous rights, especially within the context of the wind turbines that are wreaking havoc in many of the areas that we know and love. If you think about, we don't even need to go far, we can think about the European context with the Sami people. And for those of you that are aware of it, of the consistent battle that the Sami people are now facing with the erection of a wind turbine in the grazing path of the reindeer. And we hear from a lot of Sami youth that are coming forward to make this known and are representing their communities and representing the Sami people, broadly speaking, within the confines of what we see as society. And I say what we see as society because it's a lot easier for us as non-Indigenous people, not in the sense of, as being located in urban areas without having, the nomad nature of the Sami people, for example, to access the courtrooms, to access, where we can have our voices heard. It shouldn't be that hard either, but it's a lot easier for us than it is for Indigenous people. And the same is the case for Indigenous people within Latin America, within Africa, within other parts of the world. That being said, in order for Sami people to be able, or Indigenous people broadly speaking, to be able to utilize and access the human rights that are owed to them, the governments with which they fall under or are part of also need to acknowledge these Indigenous people firstly. I think when we have public participation, like you said, Andrea, with public participation comes legitimacy of the policy and of the regulatory framework that's being introduced. And if we're talking about participating equally, then we also need to acknowledge that Indigenous people need to have an active place at the table and not just being there to hear and to sign off. And having an active place at the table means that we need to acknowledge that they exist in the first place. And if the government structures that are there providing these rights are not acknowledging them and are, kind of walking past them, then there lies the problem. But then that's also the same problem, for example, the workers that are in mines, they also have rights that are being ignored. And so the problem then becomes, for there to be a true just transition, you need multi-stakeholder buy-in. Everybody needs to be on the same page, everybody needs to agree, and that stakeholder buy-in does not just occur within the borders that we see. It's then regionally, everybody needs to be on the same page, we all need to be moving in the right direction. Then internationally is the same thing. I mean, it goes, I was at a conference recently in Oslo where we met with some trade unions in the oil sector, and the discussions there, I mean, if we can't convince a country like Norway to move away from oil, then how can we convince other places to do the same thing? So it's a constant conversation. I mean, how do we, it's a chicken and the egg situation. Who do we approach first? Where do we approach them? How do we give everybody the equal participation? How do we ensure that this happens? Financing, say, all of these fall within the just transition realm. And I think sometimes with the traditional definition of a just transition that was based in the labor market, sometimes we forget that just transition extends far beyond what we ourselves can even comprehend at this point. So we take it in bite-sized pieces, you know, bit by bit, day by day, sector by sector, group by group. Yeah.
And eventually these perspectives have to come together. Thanks also for bringing it back to Europe all the time, to Sami people in the north or to Austrian Alpenland. I think that's also quite interesting in the sense of mutual learning, because I had this sense here in the meeting sometimes that knowledge transfer is unidirectional. It's knowledge from the north to be spread to the south, which is not necessarily the only way of knowledge transfer.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of different perspective because I'm from Greece, in Europe, but I haven't lived here for the last 17 years. I'm living in the Middle East, in the UAE, and picking on the democracy piece and the transition and the just transition. So there's no democracy in the UAE. However, the one thing that and I'm from Greece where democracy was born, so I'm a big advocate of democracy. What I can see is that democracy is actually holding countries back, at least Greece, in achieving greater things. What I see in the Middle East is that the only interest of the leadership is the good of the country. So there is no corruption, there's no politics around it. So things happen fast. So when the leadership decide that we are gonna be cutting by 50%, it will happen within 2 months or 3 months. Rather than it will take 15 years and 20 years to be done on a democratic society, which is great, but like you already mentioned, does it really work, you know? Because of the interests and what is happening, you know, the politics around it. So I also wanted to make one point that the COP28 president, he mentioned in, we had a conference in the UAE, the biggest oil and gas conference, which happened last month. And when we talk, he said that when we talk about just an inclusive transition, that means that we should have everybody on the table. So the difference with this COP28 will be that the private sector and the oil and gas players will be on the negotiation table with the countries, which has never happened before. So
I was at COP1. There was a very strong voice of the oil industry.
So I think what I want to say is, as a closing, is that the mindset and the whole picture is changing. So what we were used to before, it's going to change. I think this COP will be totally different, and we should expect like the landscape to change a lot of our way of thinking now. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Because I think this is really spicing up the discussion now a little bit. I mean, I've been also living in the UAE for 3 years, and yes, you can make decisions fast for sure, you know, if you have one ruler. But the problem is that normally these people tend to not get the society behind them in a participatory process, and again, it takes time, you know, and it's cumbersome, and you have all these people with different opinions and so forth. But I'm really convinced that once you do that, and that's why a vision is so important, you need to tell people what you want, and then you need to unite them behind that. But once you have that societal support, then it's kind of locked in for a much longer time period. So if the ruler dies, you know, then the next guy on the throne, so to say, will maybe make different decisions. It's not that easy in a democratic society if you made, let's say this, if you established this societal consensus, so to say, across different parties that you wanna move out of nuclear energy, like in Germany, for example. It's really strong. It doesn't really matter what other party will be elected. We are not going to go back to nuclear energy. It's over, and that's because there's a very strong societal consensus, so to say. And yes, it takes longer sometimes, and it takes also these discussions with people that say, I don't want to live here anymore because now there's this windmill, you know, and it's ugly. It doesn't look nice, and yeah, and then you need to engage with these people. And we also have like minorities in Germany, like, you know, the Bavarians, so to say. They really love their Bavaria, and you know, they love their life, and just don't get started with windmills in Bavaria. They can be in the north or west or east, or you know, they don't really care as long as they're not here. So the normal NIMBY problem, yeah. But you need to engage with the people, because it's maybe also a little bit of a psychological treat, of course, that as long as it's not in your backyard, it's not really hurting you. It's nice, it's easy to sign up for something, yeah. But then as soon as things kind of are putting a burden on you, then opinions often also change quickly. But that's really, I think, where the societal engagement also within the different, let's say, communities on the ground is really very important for such a change process to be, let's say, in a very broad basis, because then you can really push it forward. And that's, I think, it's a key difference. I mean, I hear you, and I know we all say the time is ticking, and we need to make decisions fast, and that, of course, also sometimes leads to the conclusion, well, we need to have one person deciding it now, and then we're going to build this transmission line from northern Germany to southern Germany to the Bavarians, and that's it, because the Bavarians also say we don't want to have transmission lines, right? But still green energy. But I think really it pays off to invest, let's say, the time into these discussions, and then you have a much stronger basis.
Nice discussion. We could continue that for a while, I think. The wine is waiting, let's hope, yeah. Maybe, unless you have another burning question. One.
If I understood right, you mentioned that currently you have one project in Ukraine. So my question, is it possible currently to have some renewable energy project and investment in Ukraine in current situation? Because we already have problem with energy because of the war, because of destruction, and also, so we currently losing everything what we have, and everything under the threat, it's prolonged. So how to find investments to create something new under this huge risk?
Yes, it's happening, both on energy efficiency, but also on the investment side. It's of course limited. And then the other truth to the story is that we are also, as GIZ, purchasing thousands of generators currently, of course, which are handed over to Ukraine, because that's decentral, it's quick, and people need the energy now. You need to make it robust, and that's why you need to make it very decentral. And if you want to make it fast, then there's still no way around a diesel genset, so to say. It's climate-wise not optimal. We acknowledge that, but it's of course also a very unique constellation in Ukraine currently. Yeah.
Maybe to wrap up, since we have a summit here which is focusing on solutions, how about if each of you just provides your favorite solution to the just energy transition, in whatever way you want to interpret this. And if you wish to come in with your solution, that's fine. You're not mandated, but you're welcome to as well.
That's a tricky one. One solution favorite?
You can have two.
No, but well, I will again hammer, following everything that has been said here, that the participation since the beginning, bringing everyone on board and not coming with, we want to do this, what do you think about it? But just, how can we do things? And it takes longer, it is more difficult, but we think that's the way to build support. And at event, I mean, just one data I have from a European Union conference that it has been proven that in places where community energy is strong, there's a lot more acceptance of renewables and a lot more support for renewables. And community energy is benefiting everyone. And there are community energy projects involving indigenous peoples as well. And so, yes, again, participating and making everyone participating in decision making and benefiting from the decisions would be the way to go.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think ensuring participation for legitimacy of regulatory and policy frameworks to bring buy-in and to make sure that the buy-in is not short-term but long-term in nature. But in regards to community energy, I think also the solutions that encourage the establishment of energy communities and assist in the infrastructure and knowledge sharing behind the establishment of these energy communities is a great example to encourage energy prosumership, but also to build a decentralized system where energy consumers are in charge of their energy production. Placing that kind of opportunity in the hands of communities really does change the dynamic of the energy sector, because you do have better involvement. I mean, the community itself is aware of the renewables that they use and the impact that this has for the environment, broadly speaking. So for me, yes, public participation, active public participation, definitely, and energy communities. I think those are the solutions of the future.
I also are bored with the other solutions. So. Clear statements of the renewable energy projects clearly highlight the economic and social value, make it inclusive, include everyone, and also we have to understand also as civil society that we have to choose. Either we have to be part of the problem or we have to be part of the solution. So there's only one or the other. And when we see where's the solution and where the world is going, it's better to decide to go towards, to be part of the solution. And I think that has to be we create an awareness and culture of the civil society that you have to be part of the solution. Tell us how we can get you there. This is, what we are offering. This is where we're going. And let them bring their ideas also.
Thanks. Overstepping my role as moderator for a second. My wish in this case would be to also bring another stakeholder on board in these kind of partnerships. And since I recently joined university, I would say science is a good partner, mostly.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I think one needs to ensure that the benefits of that transition are also distributed, particularly to those ones that probably are losing out. There are mechanisms to do it. But I think that's key to basically not create a strong opposition basically to the change that you want to induce. Thanks.
Any last wishes from your side, from the audience? Well, if not, then thanks. Oh, yeah, there's one.
I like your idea, but how do we get there? How do we give voice to everyone?
So certain countries are utilizing really great mechanisms to engage the community. For example, the UK has citizen assemblies and their citizen climate assemblies. The factors of these assemblies is bringing different people together, so it's really like a luck of the hat, luck of the draw who gets put in these assemblies to make sure that they're as diverse and inclusive as possible. So you can't sign up, you are you put your name in a hat and you are drawn out. Other forms is certain cities are organizing public engagement sessions where they have topics that they bring forward, and the city themselves would maybe give the topic of this week being energy transitions within the city, or putting solar panels on the National Museum within our city. And any interested party would be able to come forward and have their say. But for that to be done, you as a citizen have to be engaged in a network to access that information. So for example, cities that have really good in-state networks, Denmark is doing really well with this, Sweden is doing really well, Norway is doing really well. I mean, Norway had an e-voting system for taxation, for a new tax law that they were including. And so having those kind of structures as a basis really encourages active participation later. That being said, I mean, you can only include so many people in a room. and you can only hear so many voices. So if you have those kind of platforms, there needs to be a follow-up system as well, where maybe someone can write in a letter or go to an office and speak to an official about something that happens. That's also a form of active participation that happens, for example, in France. I'm not too sure where exactly, but there is an office within the French Ministry of Environment where you can drop off complaints that you have for the environment or for the city that you're living in. That's an example. It's a very long and tedious process in some instances, but you get results. And having the reporting afterwards, citizen climate assemblies in the UK and Norway have reports that are released based on the discussions that we're having in the assemblies, and people can comment on those. So those are just practical examples that I can give you, but I mean, they're very few and far between.
Thanks, Larissa. Thanks to all of you. Interesting discussion, despite our small start. I quite enjoyed it. I hope you did too. You may be able to grab our experts after the session. There may be wine outside. I have no idea if there's anything left. Maybe finished. Thanks a lot. Have a good evening.